Today we have invited a guest who comes from American Forest. He's the president of the organization, and so naturally we are going to talk about trees, climate change, and for you who have not heard about the organization, it's a very big organization in America. They've been existing for over 100 years, over 140 years, planted millions of trees already, and doing a lot of other work. And that's what we're going to talk about today, so that you can really understand why is that work important that the American Forests are doing for the collective of all of us. So I want to say welcome, Jad, to this interview. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Spirit. Thank you so much for the chance to join you today.
Right. Give us a quick, or not a quick, give us an overview understanding about the American Forest. What is it that you do, and why is that important in a sense?
Yeah, well, as you shared, we're an organization that's almost 150 years old. We were founded in 1875 as the first forest conservation organization in America. And we were founded at a time that America's forests were really in disrepair. We didn't have a system of governance for how to take care of our forests. It was kind of everyone just did whatever they wanted and needed out there in the woods, and it looked like it. Our forests were in really ragged shape. And so our organization was founded by concerned citizens who felt that we needed to do a better job of taking care of our forests here in the United States, everything from putting in place a system of governance and laws that could regulate how we interact with our forests, but also mobilizing citizens and companies and organizations of all types to be part of the work of taking care of our forests. And from the very beginning, we've been about the intersection of science and forestry and policy as a way to drive forward the kinds of actions and solutions that are needed in our forests. And things like creating the United States Forest Service in 1905 and creating our 193 million acres of national forests here in the United States. Those are big foundational changes that we drove forward as an organization in recognition that we needed to be really thoughtful and systematic in the way that we take care of our forests. And so today we are centered on the challenge and opportunity of forests and climate change. Forests offer immense potential to slow climate change, but at the same time, forests are incredibly vulnerable to climate change. And so we like to think of forests as the swing vote, essentially, on climate change. And in order to get it right for our forests and climate change, we have to fall back on our historic skills. We need to understand the scientific questions. We need to link that to the forestry that we're doing out there in the field. And then we need policymakers to take those ideas and to integrate them into how we govern and care for our forests in this country. And most importantly, we need to do all of that in a way that brings everybody along, where we want to act as a servant leader for the forest community, bringing together experts from all those fields and every type of public and private organization, every individual in this country to come together in doing that work that's necessary to deliver our forests as a climate change solution.
Okay, I wanna summarize a little bit of what I heard or take with me there for the listeners to see if we can break this down. Could you basically say, if you're going back to history, you said 150 years ago, you were the first one to start to kind of put in some kind of, like, I almost saw an image of the Wild Wild West,
Yeah.
where there were no rules and people were just doing, and then you guys came along and probably and you had some kind of regulations. Could that match the reality back in those days?
Yeah, that's a great description. We just didn't have the kinds of forest practices laws, for example. So, best management practices that we think of today here in the United States and around the world. We now have certain standards that forestry follows and that are put forth by governments. And back then we had very loose guidance and regulations on how the practice of forestry was done. and just the role of government more broadly in terms of owning large areas of public land and how those public lands were managed. We didn't have at that time the same type of scientific understanding of our forests, but then also we hadn't really translated that into an approach that would make sure that our forests would be healthy and resilient and thrive into the future. And it's been an ongoing challenge. I mean, just for example, the way that we manage our national forests here in the United States, against 193 million acres of our forests here in the United States are owned by the federal government and managed on behalf of all of our citizens. And even today, we're still constantly updating how that management of those lands should be done so that they can do things like solve climate change. They can do things like sustain clean water into the future. And that work's complicated, and it's sort of always changing through time. And so it's that partnership between government and organization like ours that keep kind of recalibrating how we take care of our forests to get it right into the future.
Hmm. So the sheriff of the forest stepping in to the Wild West, creating some kind of regulations, and you also of course, you're planting trees and restoring the forest, and then you're talking also about the technology connected to the forest. Could you help us understand technology's part with the forest here? It seemed important to me.
Yeah, well, you really just actually named two critically important issues that are central to the work of American forests. So we are an organization that, as I've mentioned in a few different ways, has always viewed public policy as one of the critical ways to take care of our forests. But we've also, always led by example and been out there on the ground, involved in planting millions and millions of trees and actively involving our organization directly on the ground in planting forests and in taking care of them as well. And we think that's critical both to actually deliver those results on the ground, restoring millions of acres of land through directly our own efforts in partnership with others. But we also think it makes us more informed when we do engage with public policymakers because we know from direct experience what's actually happening out there in our forests, how urban forestry is actually playing out in our cities. And so we're not speaking from an ivory tower about forests. We're speaking from direct experience that we've had doing extensive forestry work out there on the ground. And technology is another piece of the puzzle that's really important to us. Our organization, for example, back in the 1990s, led the first ever computer mapping of the tree canopy in our cities. And what we found was that we were losing tree canopy in our cities much more quickly than mayors and other government officials realized, and then the public realized. And that furthermore, the tree canopy mapping that we did at that time showed that not only we were losing our trees more quickly in cities, but that they're very inequitably distributed. That a map of tree cover in most American cities is also like a map of income and race. And so we've managed to put lots of trees in wealthy parts of our cities. But in some cases, the people who most need those health and wealth benefits of trees, and now the benefits of trees in protecting us from climate change, are the ones that are getting them the least. And so technology to this day remains the key, just as for example, in how we're helping to deliver tree equity in cities across America by using that computer technology to see where do we need trees most and how do we prioritize the tree planting and tree care that we're doing to create tree equity across our cities. And we're using the same kind of technology to prioritize and design the tree planting and other forest restoration that we're doing out in large landscapes as well, places like the Sierra Nevada of California, where there are similar kind of strategic questions and scientific questions that you need to answer in order to invest your resources the right way in how we plant and restore forests.
Okay. There's multiple ways I want to go here with this interview to ask you a question about. And so let me ask you this. Climate change is coming against all of us. So we all have to work together in that. And American Forest, of course, is one of the headliners, maybe you could say, in that fight. Now, there's multiple ways to dealing with climate change. And how important is the forest that we're focusing on forest? in the issue of climate change. Is that a good question to elaborate on?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking that question, because sometimes we feel like forests are treated as a luxury item in the climate change solution. It's sort of like the icing on the cake. Actually, forests are a big part of the cake when it comes to solving climate change. And here in the United States, just as for example, our forests and our forest products together capture and store about 15% of our carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels every year. 15% of our carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels captured and stored in our forests and our forest products here in the United States. So we are currently delivering a large net sink, for greenhouse gases in our forest sector here in the United States. And even more exciting is that there's really strong science now from a couple of different directions, from both government and the private sector, suggesting that we could nearly double that, so that our forests would be doing close to 30%, capturing close to 30% of our greenhouse gases here in the United States, or of our carbon dioxide emissions, here in the U.S. Every single year. So it's a huge opportunity. And the way we're going to get that increase is with actions like planting millions and millions, actually billions and billions more trees here in the United States, so that we have more forests, keeping the forests we have by slowing the loss of forest to development. But it's also about forest management and restoration, both managing forests in some places so that they grow more vigorously, and in other parts of America, our biggest challenge is just keeping our forests alive, with greater wildfires and forests just being killed by things like drought and pests that are more prevalent in the face of climate change. And so from all these different directions, we have opportunities to have more forests and healthier forests that are capturing and storing more carbon if we make the right moves. But the flip side of that is that because climate change is having such an intense impact on forests right now, we have some states in the Western United States that have actually already become a net source of carbon from their forests. That is, they're emitting more carbon than they're absorbing because of trees dying and forests dying as a result of climate change, and therefore emitting carbon from dying trees and burning forests. And so, that's why we talk about forests as the swing vote on climate change. They're already helping us dramatically. They could do much, much more. But if we don't pay attention to our forests, they could actually reverse, and we could start losing this power that we're getting today from our forests to slow climate change. So we view this as an absolutely essential investment. If we're serious about solving climate change, our forests have the swing vote. And we have to make this investment in what we call carbon offense and carbon defense to capture that opportunity.
Something catch my interest when you say swing votes. And imagine if someone listening doesn't really understand politics that well, and that's a difficult term to understand. Could you clarify the swing vote kind of metaphor here even more?
Yeah, absolutely. What I mean by swing vote is that because our forests have the capacity to either help us dramatically and maybe make the difference in being able to solve climate change, but actually could, if we completely ignore them, start to almost become part of the problem. If we allow them to die and burn at more rapid rates and start to emit more carbon. It really means that they're not just another piece of the puzzle that's nice to have. There's such a gap between what they could do for us if we get it right, versus the degree to which they could start to drag us down if we get it wrong. That we feel like they kind of hold the key. You think about them as the linchpin or the keystone to being able to solve climate change.
Okay, so planting more trees and creating more forests is really helping, but neglecting forests so that more forests die is really going to get everything much worse. So it's not just for the solution getting better, it's only also to make sure we don't end up in a worse situation. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why using a metaphor that makes a lot of sense here in the United States, if you think about it like a sports game, we talk about carbon offense and carbon defense in our forests. And carbon offense are are those places where we have a chance to get ahead through forests by things like planting a lot more forests and capturing a lot more carbon dioxide in our forests because we have more trees, for example. Carbon defense, as we talk about it, is just keeping the carbon that's there in our forests and protecting that carbon that's already stored. And so in many places, particularly again in the West where our forests are under such stress from things like drought and wildfire, we don't necessarily need them to capture all that much more carbon. We just need to kind of keep them healthy and keep that carbon that's stored there better protected.
Mm. That also shifts the focus, that it's more important to just preserve them than to make them capture more emissions. I've not heard that before, if that's what you said.
Yeah, well, most importantly, I think it's a combination of the two. What we find is that there's tremendous, and one of the reasons why I'm lingering on this point is that there's tremendous excitement, and there should be, around things like planting 1 trillion trees. American Forest is part of 1T.org, the new trillion tree platform that was announced in Davos, and we are both part of the international movement to scale tree planting to the greatest degree possible to slow climate change, and leading the efforts, particularly here in the United States. We call it Reforest America is the goal that we've set here to plant billions and billions of trees across this country as part of the trillion tree movement. And let me be clear, that is the single biggest way that we can increase forest contribution to solving climate change. Planting more trees equals more carbon capture in our forests. And the scientific research here in the United States suggests that our forests here could increase their carbon capture by more than 40% if we are able to plant dramatically more trees across the landscape. But the part that just hasn't gotten as much attention because it's more complicated for people is that idea of protecting the carbon that's already there in our forests and not taking that for granted, and seeing things like preventing wildfire as part of this climate action equation, that if we can actually reduce the loss of carbon from our forests, reduce emissions from wildfire, for example, well, that's actually very important also, because we want to trap more carbon, but we want to keep it there. And so the actions that we take, in some cases, thinning our forests and so that they're less prone to fire, that's not something that people would necessarily think of as part of how we're going to slow climate change, but it actually is. That if we thin our forests and they're less likely to burn and lose a lot of carbon in the future, that little bit of subtraction now to prevent a lot of loss later is actually also part of the equation right alongside planting trees. And so that's why our organization is working on both ends of that spectrum, planting a lot of trees, but then also taking those actions like thinning our forests that are most dramatically exposed to the threat of wildfire.
Mm. Yeah. If people really care about the environment, feeling I want to do something, what would you recommend a normal person to do? Is there anything people can do that you think would really matter at this stage?
Yeah, one of the things that we love about reforestation, about planting trees, is that it has a role for everyone. It's an all hands on deck climate change solution. And the great news, this is something people can do in their own backyards. They can plant trees literally on their own properties. On churches and schools and other kinds of civic institutions can plant trees on their own property to be part of this solution. Every single time we plant a tree, that's one step forward on climate change, and everyone can participate. Beyond that type of direct action, there are ways that people can volunteer with organizations in their communities that are doing lots of tree planting projects all the time and often looking for more hands to make light work. Joining an organization like American Forest is another way that people can help support this work. The way that we structure our tree planting projects, $1 plants 1 tree. So supporting our organization, you can think about it, every dollar that folks provide to an organization like ours, $1 plants 1 tree, and so that is a very tangible way in which people can get directly involved as well. And not just individuals. We have over 250 different corporate partners who are helping us do this work. companies like IKEA and Bank of America and Eddie Bauer and many others, Microsoft, that are partnering with us to plant trees and both providing volunteers to do that work, as well as providing financial support for things like purchasing tree seedlings. And so, folks who are thinking about this from the perspective of how corporations can get involved, there are tremendous opportunities for partnership there. And then, lastly, there are many opportunities as well, just for people to find their voice for forests. So whether it's engaging in social media and just helping to circulate content that talks about forests as a solution to climate change. Every time we raise awareness about the role of forests in solving climate change, that plays a critical role as well as empowering organizations like American Forests and encouraging government agencies forward in this work. And for folks here in the United States, there are all sorts of opportunities to engage in the political process. Right now, in the United States Congress, for example, we have a major legislation proposed that American Forests has helped to inform that would plant billions of trees across America. One piece of legislation in particular, the Climate Stewardship Act that we helped to create, that would plant 16 billion trees across the United States by 2050. So there's political discussion right now about really big moves on forests and climate change, particularly through planting trees. And I think government officials that really want to know what the public thinks about ideas like that. And so a huge opportunity for folks to find their voice in the political process as well, and to speak up for forests as a climate change solution.
Then I'm going to summarize what you just said. You talked about you can plant a tree yourself. You can join an organization, kind of like American Forests, and then American Forests is almost like an umbrella, I guess, that you've been existing so long that your tentacles are already quite big.
Yes.
Right? You could donate $1 per tree. So almost, if you and I, Jad, if we make a competition or a challenge for ourselves, I'm turning 31 this year. So if I donate my age, that would be 31 trees.
That's right.
That's a beautiful birthday gift to ask for. And you would donate something similar, right?
30 something, how's that?
30 something.
Lower than that, but I'll match you. I'll put it that way. I'll keep it a secret, but I will match your number.
Perfect. So you could donate and it would not cost you more than $1 if you go from American Forest. And then you said raise awareness on social media, also important. And then the last thing you said, could you just summarize to clarify that one?
Yeah, just, we were talking just now about the role that individuals can play, but just the critical role that institutions can play as well, particularly corporations, have been such leaders in this work of planting trees for climate change. And so I think there's continued huge opportunities for other corporations to join this effort globally, to help us plant 1 trillion trees here in the United States, to help us plant billions of trees to reforest America. So we're, as I said, we have over 250 corporate partners right now, and always excited to find other corporations that want to provide volunteers and financial resources to help make this happen. So role for individuals, role for corporations, and of course, we've talked a lot about today, a really important role for government to help lead this work forward and put public resources in to match these kinds of private sector resources, so we can get all the way there on Forest for Climate.
Okay, we're gonna start to end this interview. I would like to hear. I have a specific question soon, but before that, just give us some kind of background. When did you start to engage in this, and why do you think? Why did you start to go into the environment as a sector?
So I've actually worked my whole career in the environment. When I was a college student, I had always been interested in the environment. And when I went to college, I didn't realize it would be an option to work on protecting the environment for my career, and was just really fortunate to take some some wonderful classes when I was in college that helped me realize the opportunities to make my life's work, to work on conserving the environment. And I've worked on forests from the very beginning for, okay, I'm gonna reveal my age, a few decades now, and been passionate about that. And my whole career in forest conservation has been working in coalitions. I've been the leader and director of many different coalitions prior to coming to American Forests. And in fact, I brought with me to the leadership of American Forests a coalition that I co-founded 11 years ago called the Forest Climate Working Group. And the Forest Climate Working Group is the only coalition here in the United States across the whole forest sector, private landowners and forest products companies, government agencies, conservation organizations, academics, carbon investors, all working together, more than 50 different organizations working together to identify what actions we need to take to make U.S. forests a climate change solution, and then to tell public officials and others what we need to do and rally the nation forward. And so that, that the birth of this coalition about 11 years ago was for me when my interest and passion in forests fully scaled into applying that to the climate change challenge. And really for that 11 years ever since have been wholly centered my career on that particular issue of forests and climate change. And just been grateful for the opportunity here at American Forests as the president and CEO to center this organization, to put the heft and credibility of the nation's first forest conservation organization, put all of that weight and expertise behind forests as a climate change solution and leading the country forward on this issue in the way that's needed.
Mm. What was the website to that one you said, to coalition?
Yeah, it's a forestclimateworkinggroup.org. And it just talks about our activities and the various really great members that we have of that coalition. And I'm really proud that here in the United States, if you go over to Capitol Hill and ask members of Congress, what they think about forests, they'll tell you that the Forest Climate Working Group is kind of their first resource, first stop for shaping their opinions and getting information about what we should do. So we've really, I think, created a very respected presence here in Washington and across the country as states and local governments and others try to identify the way forward.
And if you want to go into American Forest, then you go to americanforest.org. Now,
that's correct.
Right, Jad, we're going to end this by, I'm going to allow you to, I have a favorite question I often ask, and that is there anything that you think that most people don't know or understand that you would like for more people to understand about the climate or about the forest or in general?
So I'm going to tell you off the front, I'm going to cheat because I think there are two things that are absolutely critical that people need to know, and they are connected. So it's sort of like one answer.
Perfect.
The first thing is something I said at the very beginning, and I really want to underscore this. Forests and forest products here in the United States are already a climate change solution. And often people will say, well, we need to make our forests a climate change solution. And the reality is they already are providing a really substantial climate change solution. And we think that's really important because sometimes when we face skepticism about, should we invest in forests? Can we afford to invest in forests and invest in, for example, clean energy? And we feel very strongly it's not an either or. We need an all of the above strategy on climate change. We need every single thing that we can do to solve climate change. We need to be doing it. And we know that our forests can solve climate change because it's happening right now. And we know exactly what it is that we need to do more of, like planting more trees, like making our forests more resilient to wildfire. All these actions that if we take them together can make our forests an even bigger solution to climate change than they are right now. But I want to give you something that we haven't talked about too much that is I think, surprise for a lot of people in terms of where we can find solutions to climate change in our forests. And it's right outside my window here in Washington, D.C. I'm staring down at a little park across the street from our office, where our organization a number of decades ago planted some small little trees here in Washington, D.C. that have now grown up into these beautiful trees that arch over the city streets and this park here in Washington, D.C. The urban forests in the United States capture nearly 20% of the carbon that we're capturing in our forests in total. So a fifth of the carbon capture in trees and forests here in the United States is actually happening in cities, in urban areas, and that really surprises people. But the even bigger kicker on that, in terms of solving climate change, is that those same trees and forests reduce energy use for heating and cooling in people's homes by 7.2%. That not only saves billions of dollars for homeowners, but it saves millions and millions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that would otherwise be created by generating that energy. So when you take the combined benefit of urban forests for capturing carbon through the process of sequestration, like forests everywhere, and then you add in these energy savings that we get, urban forests are one of the most powerful climate solutions that we have, and that really surprises people. And then when you add in the critical role that urban forests play in protecting people from climate change, for example, the impacts of extreme heat on our cities and the role that urban forests play in cooling our streets and in cleaning the air, you put all that together and suddenly you say urban forests are climate action plus climate justice in incredibly powerful ways for our future. So it's really important to us that people say, forests are a proven solution to climate change. We have to make this investment if we're going to get it right. And it has to be all trees and forests, including in cities.